Good evening. It's great to be with you on a Tuesday night. We're going to do a beautiful page tonight, a beautiful daf, page 55 here in Tractate Kesubos, the 15th volume of the Talmud, the laws of marriage contracts, and today opening chapter 5. Let's light up the darkness. And before we do anything else, let's blow the shofar. We blow it every day this month, the last month of the Hebrew year, the month of Elul, as we wake up our souls, wake up ourselves, looking forward to the days of awe, which begin at the next Hebrew month, Tishrei, the first month of the year, which begins with Rosh Hashanah, following into Yom Kippur. Great to be with you. Who is learning with us on a Tuesday evening? Pauline in Chicagoland, Nancy, North Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Shandora in the Bronx, Paula in the Great Northwest, Renee in Indiana, Dorothy in Pittsburgh, Paul in Chicago, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Eleanor in Florida, John in Maine, Stephen in New Hampshire, Bella in Florida. Dave says, excellent. I'm not sure what to, but I love it. Ruth in Kentucky, Tom in PA, Ryan in Florida, Paul in the Northwest. Paula likes the tunes. That was Eitan Katz. We're almost, I think we're in the second to last song here in his album Unplugged number 3. Usually takes 2 countdown timers to get through each song. Dale in Nevada, Jerry in Texas. I'm sure I'm going to say your name wrong, and I apologize. Elugu, Prince Pido, checking in from Nigeria. Awesome to have you with us. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Luis loves the sounds of the shofar. Jeff in New York. Over there on the YouTube side, Yitzhak in Kansas City. Lynn in North Texas. Welcome, everybody. These are really exciting times, I got to tell you. I've mentioned before, later in the year, with God willing, everything goes right. We're scheduled to begin production on our next movie, a thriller, a murder mystery thriller, with a rabbi who steps up as the somewhat reluctant detective, but when the cops won't investigate, tzedek, tzedek, tarduf, justice, justice shall you pursue. So he has to step in and confront some major bad guys. And it's called Guns N' Moses. Things are definitely heating up. We're in the midst of the casting process. We won't make announcements until the right time, but there's a lot going on, and it's keeping us so busy during the days. But I really look forward, to this time in the evening when I can just put the movie aside for a couple hours and learn with you, my holy sisters and brothers. All right, tonight's daf, Nun Hey, page 55 here in Tractate Kesubos. Chapter 5, very much a continuation of chapter 4. More particulars about the contract itself. What is the price of the marriage contract? We've talked about the minimum. Tonight we'll be talking a little bit more about the maximum. Is there a maximum that a husband can promise in the marriage contract, in order to sort of attract maybe a guy is marrying up into a more prominent family, and he's going to have to step up and offer a big price. Not right away, right? You're not purchasing the bride, as it were. You're just promising that if the husband dies or if they eventually divorce, that he will owe her this large sum of money. And then if he dies, right, she's entitled to that before she moves on. When she becomes a widow, as we saw yesterday, she might continue living in her husband's home as a widow and drawing sustenance from the estate if she doesn't demand the ketubah price. If she does, that indicates she's ready to get on with her life and marry again. So she receives that sum of the, sometimes I say kesubah, sometimes ketubah, it's the same. So if she demands the price of the kesubah, then she's indicated she's ready to move on. She gets that money. She no longer can draw sustenance from the estate. We were talking about that yesterday. Now we open chapter 5 on page 54b. Here's Mishna number 1 of chapter 5. Although they said as a principle that a virgin collects 200 dinars as the payment for her marriage contract, and that a widow collects 100 dinars, these are the minimum amounts that the contract can be worth. Those are the minimum, right? A virgin 200 dinars, a widow 100 dinars. If the husband wishes to add even an additional 10,000 dinars, which in the ancient world was a fortune, I think $1 million basically, so he may add it. If she is then widowed or divorced, whether from betrothal or whether from marriage, she collects the entire amount, including the additional sum beyond the minimum. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, if she is widowed or divorced from marriage, she collects the total amount. But if she's widowed or divorced from betrothal, a virgin collects 200 dinars and a widow 100 dinars. And this is because he wrote the additional amount for her in the marriage contract only in order to marry her. Right? Recall in the old days, they would betroth, then she becomes permitted only to him, and not permitted to him yet until they're actually married, but she becomes prohibited to every other man in the world. Right? So even though they might not be living together yet, they might not have consummated the union yet, they haven't stepped under the wedding canopy, the chuppah yet, they are considered married in the sense that if she then goes and sleeps with another man, it would be adultery. And if they want to split up the betrothal, he has to give her a bill of divorce, and he would have to pay this amount of the kesubah that he's already given if he wrote the kesubah at the time of betrothal. However, if he added extra amounts beyond the minimum, those would only come due if they divorced after they were formally married. If the divorce, the breakup, comes during the betrothal period, he would only owe her the minimum amount, right? 200 for the virgin, 100 for the widow. Rabbi Yehuda says a related law with regard to the marriage contract. If he wishes, he may write for a virgin a document for 200 dinars, as is fitting for her, and she may then write a receipt stating, I received 100 dinars from you. Now, even though she has not actually received the money, the receipt that she writes serves as a means for her to waive half of the amount due to her for her marriage contract. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the financial commitment in the marriage contract is a right due to the wife, and because it is her right that she owns, she may waive that right or part of that right if she chooses to do so. And similarly for a widow, he may write 100 dinars in the contract, and she may write a receipt stating, I received from you 50 dinars. Right? He can't write an amount in the marriage contract less than the minimum, 200 for the virgin, 100 for the widow. But if he's just poor and they're not going to be able to marry, they're expecting to continue in poverty because he's going to be a student or something like that, and it's just not possible for him to agree to that amount, and she still wants to marry him, she might waive that right that she has. But they can't waive it at the time of the writing. She receives the right to that money in case of their divorce or his death. However, she may write a receipt. Okay, I already received half of it. And even though she didn't get that cash, she can write that receipt as if she did. And what she's really doing is waiving half of her right to receive that minimum, according to Rabbi Yehuda. However, Rabbi Meir says it is prohibited to do this, as anyone who reduces the amount of the marriage contract to less than 200 dinars for a virgin or 100 dinars for a widow, this marital relationship amounts to licentious sexual relations, because it is as if he did not write any marriage contract at all when they reduced the price. Very interesting. So there's this classic, slightly off-color story that's told in many contexts, often attributed to George Bernard Shaw, Winston Churchill, H.G. Wells, Bertrand Russell. I actually looked it up, and it was not any of those guys who originally said it. I think it was some kind of, overly articulate millionaire from New York who was visiting Canada, apparently. That's right. It became more colorful when it was at a dinner party with Winston Churchill. But the idea was that, let's call it Winston Churchill, was talking to his neighbor at dinner, who was, very kind of uptight society woman. And they're sort of challenging each other with questions, playing a game. And so he says, "So, madam, would you live with me?" is the way it was originally put, but it's usually stated as, "Would you sleep with me for £1 million?" And she says, "Oh, for £1 million, why not?" And he says, "Well, then would you do it for £5?" And she says, "What kind of a woman do you think I am?" And he says, "We've already established that. We're just haggling about the price." So that's the way that story's usually told. And the idea that if any money is involved, somehow the character of the woman is diminished. It is exactly the opposite of what we're learning here in this Mishnah, right? That there's a minimum promise that you make to a woman when you marry her, that if you divorce her or if you die, that she will receive, so that she will be taken care of, post this, after this marriage ends. And if you try to reduce that amount below that minimum, and then you go ahead and get married, that marriage is not a real marriage. And according to Rabbi Meir, it's licentious sexual activity because the price was too low. So it actually here, the price matters, right? And there is actually above that price in the contract, okay, this is how proper people behave, and he's making a promise to take care, so she'll be taken care of. And if it's lower than that, she should not submit to that. She's not allowed to submit to that. And if she does submit to that, it's some kind of licentious act because the price was too low. Very interesting. Now, that's the Mishnah. Here's the Gemara. The Mishnah states that if he wishes to add to the obligation in the marriage contract, he may do so. And the Gemara asks, isn't it obvious that if he wishes to add, he may do so? And the Gemara explains, lest you say that the sages instituted a fixed ceiling on the amount, one may designate in the marriage contract in order not to embarrass one who does not have sufficient funds. The Mishnah therefore teaches us that the sages were not specific about this. If he wishes to add, he may do so. There's no ceiling on how much the prospective husband can promise in the marriage contract in order to entice the bride and her family to agree to the union. As much as he can afford, he can promise that. We have a minimum, no maximum. And you might have thought that there would be a maximum, as explained, because then, that prices out a lot of poorer people. But, too bad. That's how, people of sort of similar socioeconomic strata end up finding each other. The Mishnah states that if he wishes to add even 10,000 dinars to the marriage contract, he may do so. The Gemara comments, it does not teach he wishes to write for her, but rather if he wishes to add. Not he writes for her 10,000, but he adds 10,000. And this language indicates that the additional sum that he wrote is added to the marriage contract itself as opposed to being an independent obligation. And this supports the opinion of Rabbi Ivu, who said what Rabbi Yanai said. As Rabbi Ivu said that Rabbi Yanai said, the stipulation in the marriage contract, as well as additional amounts he chooses to add to the contract, are comparable to the marriage contract itself. If you add more to the marriage contract, right, and then you're married, you stand under the chuppah, so it's a full marriage, then from then on, if you're divorced or the guy dies, that's what he owes. That's the amount that he owes. If the marriage breaks up during betrothal, maybe it's just the minimum amount is all that he's going to owe, or his estate will owe. But once they reach marriage, if he added amounts, they become as, tangible an asset of hers as the minimum amount. Now, this principle produces a practical difference with regard to many issues. So this additional amount, what are the implications of this, that it's treated like the standard amount? It is relevant to one who sells her marriage contract. She sells her marriage contract, indicating that such a sale includes the additional sum of the marriage contract. She might have thought, well, I need some money now. I'll sell my marriage contract. I'm just selling the minimum amount, but that additional amount that he promised, I'm still going to be entitled to that because that's separate. No, the additional amount, even if it's a huge amount, is sort of fused with the original standard amount. And if she sells her contract, she's selling the whole contract. If she waives her right to collect, she's waiving the whole right to collect. The principle produces a practical difference with regard to many issues. It is relevant to one who sells her marriage contract, indicating that such a sale includes the additional marriage, and to one who waives her marriage contract to her husband or his heirs, teaching that the additional sum is included in this relinquishing of rights to payment of the contract. And it is relevant to a rebellious woman, from whom the court deducts a specific amount from her marriage contract each week until there is nothing left. These deductions come from the additional sum as well. And this principle also results in a practical difference to one who vitiates her marriage contract, as one who states that she received part of the payment for her marriage contract, does not receive the remainder without taking an oath, right? The oath saying that I swear that I have received this much as partial payment of my marriage contract and no more, right? Obviously vows, especially in this society, were taken seriously. And so you make someone swear, because they're not readily going to lie when they're taking an oath where they believe that there's going to be, fundamental consequences to their soul, perhaps both in this world and the next, if they're lying about such an oath. So one who vitiates her marriage contract, she must take an oath when she says that she's received part of her marital contract, but not all. It's also relevant to one who demands payment for her marriage contract, as the sages ruled, we learned this yesterday, that from the time she begins to demand payment after her husband has died, she waives the right to further sustenance from his estate. And this applies with regard to one who demands the additional sum as well, and to one who violates the precepts of halacha, or of Jewish custom, who may be divorced without receiving payment for her marriage contract, including the additional sum. If she commits adultery, she's going to be forced to divorce her husband, and she will not receive the payment of the kesuba, neither the standard payment nor any additional payment that the husband may have promised. Now we're on 55a. It is also relevant to an increase in value, as she does not collect the main or additional sums from the increased value of the property in a case where the husband's estate was not sufficient at the time of his death to pay the entire cost of her marriage contract. But his heirs, right, his sons, later increased the value of the property. And so you might have thought that, well, at the time that her husband died, and he had, one field, and, it was not enough to cover the cost of her marriage contract. But later, that field became more productive or became more valuable because the neighborhood, value went up. And so she comes back around and says, okay, well, that field wasn't enough to cover my marriage contract when he died, but it's enough now, so pay me. Doesn't work that way. And nor would it work that way for the additional sums. And this principle, this idea that the additional sums and the standard sum are fused is also relevant to an oath, because if the wife is required to take an oath in order to receive her marriage contract, the additional sum is also included in that oath. and to the Shemitah year, the sabbatical year, when debts are canceled, but a marriage contract is not annulled when other debts are canceled in the sabbatical year, and this includes the additional sum as well. And with regard to one who writes a document transferring all his property to his sons and leaves his wife a specific plot of land for her marriage contract, this teaches that she receives both the main and the additional sums of her contract only from that piece of land. And this halacha, this law, also teaches that she collects the payment only from land, and specifically from land of inferior quality, and that a widow loses her ability to collect the main and additional sums as long as she is in her father's home for more than 25 years after her husband's death. And the principle also applies to the stipulation in the marriage contract that the male offspring inherit their mother's dowry when her husband passes away, in addition to the inheritance they receive together with their other brothers. And these laws apply equally to the additional sum of the marriage contract. There's a long list of laws. We don't need to, unpack all of them. Some of them we haven't covered yet. But just the idea that that additional sum that he promises when he writes the kesubah at the time of their marriage, any additional sums are fused with the minimum payment, and they're treated together in all of these kinds of laws. New subject. It was stated that there was a debate among the sages with regard to the stipulation in the marriage contract that the male offspring inherit the sum stipulated in their mother's marriage contract. Right? It says as part of the kesubah that if she dies first, then the amount that was promised to her upon the husband's death or divorce is now going to pass to her male offspring. Right? The husband may have had multiple wives when that was permitted, and so the amount that was in her kesubah goes to, if she dies first, goes to her male children. So the sages of Pumbedisa say it is not seized. This amount that's going to flow because she died, that's going to flow to her sons. The sages of Pumbedisa say it is not seized from liened property that has been sold by the father. And this is because we learned in a Mishna, on page 52b, that the text of the stipulation is they will, the male sons of this woman who died before her husband died, they will inherit the money set aside for their mother's marriage contract. And from this phrase it is clear that the stipulation follows the laws of inheritance, and therefore their inheritance can be taken only from property in the father's possession at the time of his death, but not from property that he had sold, right? As opposed to her, right? So when she was alive, if her husband predeceased her, and it turned out that he sold property that was needed in order to cover her marriage payment under the kesubah, then there was a lien on that property. He did not have a right to sell property if it was necessary to pay her kesubah in the case he dies. And so she could, because she had a lien on that property, she can go pursue it even to the purchasers of it who purchased it before the husband died. But her sons, after she dies, cannot do that. There is another dispute between the sages of Pumbedisa and the residents of Mata Mechasia with regard to one who set aside payment for his wife's marriage contract from movable property, and these objects are in their pure, unadulterated state at the time of the execution of the marriage contract after the husband's death. In this case, all agree that the widow may take them without an oath that confirms that her husband did not leave her any other money for the payment of her marriage contract, as it is clear that he set aside these objects for that purpose. Movable objects in their pure state means they haven't been sold or lost. There's another, and however, if the movable objects were not in their pure, unadulterated state, for example, they were lost, so then the sages of Pumbedisa say that she takes the payment of her marriage contract from other property, as all of the husband's property is liened to pay her marriage contract without an oath. And the residents of Mata Mechasia say she takes her payment only with an oath, because of a concern that she may have already received other property as payment from her marriage for her marriage contract. And the law is that she may take it without an oath, in accordance with the opinion of the sages of Pumbedisa, right? All the husband's property has a lien on it, in the sense that when he dies, if there's not enough property to pay her the marriage contract that she's owed, she can go chasing any of his property that got sold, maybe, not so long before he died, and those purchasers are going to have to cough it up because their husband did not have a right to sell it. If the husband set aside land for her, which he demarcated on all 4 of its borders, so then she seizes that land without an oath for her marriage payment. If he demarcated it on only 1 border, which is not as clear an indication, the sages of Pumbedisa say she still takes it without an oath, and the residents of Mata Mechasya say she takes it with an oath. Excuse me. And the law is that she takes it without an oath, like the sages of Pumbedisa say. Furthermore, they had a dispute in a case where someone told witnesses, write and sign a deed of gift and give it to the intended recipient of the gift. In such a case, so this is just another ruling of the sages of Pumbedisa, has nothing to do with the law of Kesubos, right? Kesubos, marriage contracts. So in this other case, what was it? Somebody told witnesses, write and sign a deed of gift and give it to the intended recipient of the gift. Right? I'm going to give my field to this guy. It's going to be a gift. I can't pick up the field and hand it to him. So write a deed to that field, and the deed will say it is given as a gift to this guy, and now give it to him. Okay? So in such a case, if the witnesses acquired it from him on behalf of the recipient by performing a formal act of acquisition, they do not need to consult with him again, as there can be no retraction after a formal acquisition. Formal acquisition is a kinyan. I'm going to give him this field. We're going to write a contract, and we're going to hand him the contract. Writing a contract, which is a deed of gift, that's not formal acquisition. That just memorializes, it's evidence that the gift was given. The formal act of acquisition is that I'm going to hand him something. Usually it's an object, like a handkerchief. And the witnesses see that. They can say, I testified on we testify on such and such a day, Sal, in order to give his field to Joe, picked up a handkerchief that was white in his right hand, and he handed it to Joe, who took it from him. And on that day, the field was handed, and that's memorialized in this deed. So if there was that formal acquisition witnessed by the witnesses, then they can hand over the deed of gift to Joe. But if the witnesses did not acquire it from him, the sages of Pumbedisa say that they do not need to consult with him again, but the residents of Mata Mechasya say they must consult with him again. And the law is that they must consult with him again. So the law is not always like the sages of Pumbedisa. In this case of the deed of gift with formal acquisition, the law follows the residents of Mata Mechasya. Now the Mishna states that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says that a woman who collects the payment of her marriage contract after marriage receives the main and additional sums, while one who collects it after betrothal receives only that basic amount, the standard amount. So it was stated Rav and Rabbi Nassan differed with regard to this issue. One said the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and the other said the law is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So it may be concluded that Rabbi Nassan is the one who said that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, as we have heard that Rabbi Nassan follows the principle of assessing intention. Even if one did not make an explicit statement, the court assesses what his intention must have been and decides the law based on that assessment. And it is clear that he follows this principle, as Rabbi Nassan says that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Shazuri in the case of an ill person in danger. What are we talking about? If this person who is in danger, like for example, he's about to be eaten by lions, or he's so ill that he's on death's door, or he's being taken away in chains by a marauding army and he's likely going to be executed, or he's literally walking to his execution. If this person says, write a bill of divorce for my wife, and that's all he said, write a bill of divorce for my wife, the court understands that statement as write a bill of divorce for my wife and give it to her. If you write a bill of divorce, you're not divorced. To be divorced from your wife, you write a bill of divorce and hand it to her, right? Or you can actually toss it into her domain, but there has to actually be a transfer of that bill of divorce to her. And if you've only written it, and even if you say to your agent, write the bill of divorce, you have not indicated write it and give it to her, but a person who's in danger, the court says that must be what he meant. So although he did not explicitly state this, Rabbi Nassan holds that in such a situation, the court assesses that this was the husband's intent, and he follows it. He's about to die. Why is he asking for a bill of divorce to be written? Once he's dead, it can no longer be given to her. So it must be that he wants to give it to her now. Page 55b. And the law is also in accordance with his opinion with regard to, just because we're talking about this one sage, now, kind of unrelated law. And the law is also in accordance with his opinion with regard to the teruma of the tithe from demai, that's doubtfully tithed produce. Produce purchased from a common, uneducated person, an ignoramus and am haaretz. This is considered demai. It might have been tithed, it might not. And by rabbinic law, it is regarded as uncertain whether the seller separated tithes and the teruma of the tithe from it. So Rabbi Nassan rules in accordance with Rabbi Shimon ben Shazuri's opinion in a case where after one bought demai, and then he separated the teruma of the tithe. The teruma is consecrated food that only priests can eat. And then this teruma becomes mingled with the produce from which it was separated. So what do? So if all the produce was treated as actual teruma, well, the only solution would be that all the produce has to be given to a priest or sold to a priest for a very small amount of money because you're not sure how much of it is teruma. But because it's mingled, you don't know what's teruma and what's not. So therefore, only a priest can eat the whole pile. And somebody's going to have a big financial loss because of that. Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, however, rules that in the case of demai, the owner may ask the fruit seller if he did properly separate the tithes or not. If the seller responds that he did, so now the owner may rely on that, and so this demai that he bought, it didn't need to be tithed, right? And when you separated teruma from it, you actually didn't do anything at all. So the fact that the teruma then became mingled with it doesn't change it into, possible teruma, and now it remains unconsecrated produce that can be sold to anybody, who wants to eat it, as opposed to teruma or possible teruma that can only be sold to a priest. So that's a nice ruling that you can go back and check with the am haaretz. Now, having established that, I'm wondering why you can't just go back and ask in every case, but that's the way it's worded here. So having established that Rabbi Nassan follows the principle of assessment, so the Gemara asks, and does Rav not follow this principle of assessing intention? But it was stated that Rav and Shmuel disagreed about a specific case with regard to the gift of a person on his deathbed, in which it was also written that the gift was written with an act of acquisition. There is a rabbinic ordinance that one on his deathbed can effect the transfer of property without the ordinarily required act of acquisition, because he's on his deathbed. But in this case, such an act was performed anyway. So in the school of Rav, they say in the name of Rav, so he had him ride on 2 horses, meaning that he gave him a gift with a document strengthened in 2 different ways. Because he was on his deathbed, it was already strong. And they did a formal act of acquisition just to be sure. And Shmuel said, I don't know what to decide about it. And the Gemara explains the 2 opinions. In the school of Rav, they said in the name of Rav, he had him ride on 2 horses, meaning that he performed the transfer in a manner that took advantage of 2 separate laws to strengthen its validity. In one aspect, it is similar to a gift of a healthy person, and in a different way, it is similar to the gift of a person on his deathbed. And both of these aspects act to strengthen the transfer. On the one hand, it is similar to the gift of a healthy person in that if he arose from the bed and recovered, he cannot retract it since he performed the proper act of acquisition. That's it, he gave it. On the other hand, it is like the gift of a person on his deathbed in that if he said, my loan, i.e. money owed to me, is transferred to so-and-so as a gift. His loan is in fact transferred to so-and-so. Although ordinarily ownership of a debt, like I own a promissory note, somebody owes me money, I can sell that note or I can gift that note to someone else who can then collect from the borrower. As his loan is in fact transferred to so-and-so. Although ordinarily Ownership of a debt cannot be transferred without a formal transference of the promissory note. The verbal statement is sufficient to effect that transfer because the gift is made on a person's deathbed. And Shmuel said, I don't know what to decide about it. Perhaps his performance of an act of acquisition indicates that he resolved to transfer it to him only with a bill of sale, and since his intention is that the sale not take effect until he also gives a bill of sale, the transfer does not take effect, as the bill of sale is not effective after the death of the owner. We're going to move a little forward on page 56a, get a jump on tomorrow, since we're doing well with time. In any case, it has been established that Rav also follows the principle of assessing one's intention, which calls into question the conclusion that Rabbi Nassan is the one who said that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rather, the Gemara concludes, both Rav and Rabbi Nassan follow the principle of assessing intention, and the debate can be explained in a different way. According to the one who says that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, this works out well. According to the one who says that the law is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, here too there is an assessment of his intention. Right? There's reason to make an assumption about what he intended, even though he didn't make his intention clear. Why did he give her the additional sum of the marriage contract? It was due to a sense of intimacy between them, as they were betrothed and they were planning to get married. And since he did demonstrate a sense of intimacy with her, the assessment is that he intended to give her the additional sum. I guess what they're arguing about is whether you pay those additional sums when he dies, when they're only betrothed. We learned that, no, he only... The estate, if he dies while they're betrothed, and they already wrote the marriage contract with additional sums in it, first we learned that, okay, the estate only has to pay her that minimum amount, the standard amount, but not the additional sums because they never got married. But here we could say, well, maybe it was his intention to provide her the whole amount since, he has betrothed her. Why should we assume that he's only intending to be liable for the whole amount after they're fully married? Now that they're betrothed, they're already coming closer and closer together. Rav Chanina, who was known for teaching biblical verses, sat before Rabbi Yanai and said, the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Yanai said to him, go out and read your verses outside. Your area of expertise is biblical verses, not law, not halacha. What you said is incorrect and should not be said in the study hall, as the law is actually not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Now I'm almost done, so get your questions or comments in. Rav Yitzchak bar Rav Dimi said in the name of our teacher, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the redactor of the Mishna, the law, the halacha, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rav Nachman said that Shmuel said the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. And Rav Nachman also said this statement, the halacha is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. And the sages of Nehardea say in the name of Rav Nachman, the law is in accordance with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. And so the Gemara comments, and although Rav Nachman cursed them and said, any judge who rules in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, such and such unspecified misfortune will happen to him, even so, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah on this issue. Since the Gemara presented a number of different opinions, it concludes, and the practical law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Fortunately, this issue does not come up anymore, because in modern times, the betrothal and the full union under the chuppah all happen on the day of the wedding. They're not separated in time the way they were in ancient days. All right, let's see what questions or comments we can cover. Here on page 55, the first Mishnah in chapter 5 of Tractate Kesubos. Tom, a woman is prohibited from every man before going under the chuppah already. Yes. Right, she becomes prohibited to every other man when she is betrothed. You might be saying she's prohibited to sleep with every other man because she can't have premarital sex. But she's allowed to marry any man that she wants until she gets married. When betrothal was separated, when Kedushin was separated from Nisuin, when betrothal was separated from Chuppah, she became prohibited to marry any other guy as soon as she was betrothed, right? Joseph, I would assume the idea of licentiousness is basically that the traditional way of doing a kesuba is to take care of the woman's needs and not extract from her some selfish ends. This deviating from tradition is licentiousness. Right. I mean, I think what they're basically saying, what Rabbi Meir is saying, and it's the law follows Rabbi Meir, she cannot waive less than, she cannot waive part of the minimum amount as they enter the marriage, right? He must promise the minimum amount, 200 dinars for the virgin, 100 for the widow, and they cannot waive that. She cannot waive any amount of that. If she does, basically it's like they started living together without getting married, because giving that minimum amount and writing a kesuba are all part of the marriage process, and you can't take out any part of the marriage process. If you do, and they start living together as man and wife, but they're not really married, that's why it would be licentious sexual contact. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. We moved smartly and efficiently through this first page in chapter 5. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Wednesday, for page 56. Have a great night.